Penblwydd hapus I ni, penblwydd hapus I ni, penblwydd hapus literary as feck, penblwydd hapus I ni. Yay!
You know, that makes me realize I don't actually know the Irish for happy birthday, which is
That was
sad.
me blowing out the candles.
Okay, so yes, for those of you who are paying attention, this is our 50th episode of Trivia Spec.
Yeah.
So
of
that's
all that wasted time.
Yes, and so actually, if it's all right, I'd like to give a quick shout out to two folks because who put up with us more than maybe most, and one of those is Gino Cuddy, who you may have seen appear on this show before and in various other things we do, and my mate Tavis Stevenson, who hello Tavis, watches these things when he's at work in the bookshop in this and yeah, we were just talking on the phone the other or via messaging on the phone the other day, and that's the international symbol for messaging on a phone.
Yes.
Yeah. So for old men. But anyway, yeah. So thank you, Tavis, for continuing to watch and listen to us talk.
I would be very happy if it was possible one day we could do a recording from his shop. That would be good.
That would be absolutely awesome. Yeah, absolutely.
A little look about, because it sounds like a pretty interesting store.
It's the best thing about British Columbia for sure.
And you know, a dwindling thing in today's world as well, right? The
secondhand bookshops. Yeah, we've talked about that over the years, and how Amazon particularly was brutal in terms of not just obviously putting bookstores out of business by being, you know, an online bookseller, but then really putting the screws onto anyone who tried to sell their stuff through Amazon. Apparently, it's anyway. Screw you, Amazon.
And yet we still lose you.
And yet I just bought a poncho from.
How far the anarchist has fallen.
Yes, yes, but that's a nice segue, because we many moons ago, when we decided to start this show, literally I think one of the first things we said was, oh yeah, let's do an episode about B. Traven or Traven. Which I like the fact that in the documentary I just watched about them that nobody could even agree on how to say his name.
Yeah,
let alone
I'm surprised they at least agreed on the B bit.
Yes, yeah.
Traven.
So yeah, we talked about this way long ago, and it's exciting that we decided to save it for our 50th episode.
Because we decided we were trying to look for something to celebrate our birthday, something that we would both choose, I guess. So this seemed, like you said, because we've been talking about it for a while, and so I actually never read B. Traven until you many moons ago handed me a copy of the Death Ship,
yes, which still remains probably my very favorite of his books, although it's not the first that I read. One of the ones we're talking about today is The Rebellion of the Hanged. Was the book of his that I read.
It's up there. It's second favorite for me, because after that I went away and read Treasure of the Sierra Madre, which is just a phenomenal book, and also a great film as well. Like, it's one of those rare instances where both are just stone classics, right?
Yes, and Treasure is one of those films as well where everyone talks about it and you're like, oh yeah, and then you see it and you're like, oh yeah, okay,
exactly, yeah,
it is a classic. It's fantastic.
So we maybe talk a little bit about B. Traven via this documentary as well, which is up on YouTube. Should you want to see it, it's a BBC documentary, B. Traven, A Mystery Solved, which I've actually watched a few times now.
Me too. That was not the first time I'd seen it, and also I think that I read either there was a book related to that documentary or a book came out around the same time about the mystery of B. Traven, And
it's called The Mystery of Traven because the author Judy Stone, I think her name is, she's interviewed, isn't she? And
yes, yeah. So I think I read that way back.
I think there's another one as well. Is it Will Wyatt? Maybe is the guy who.
Yeah, I might have even read more than one.
Yeah,
I was fairly obsessed for a while in my early 20s. But the joke is, and it's you know, the whole point of using this pseudonym was that he was trying to totally efface himself, right? Like he wanted to remove himself completely from the story of his novels, and instead managed to do exactly the opposite, where now when he's talked about, for the most part, he's talked about as it's the mystery of who he was rather than the set of novels he wrote,
right.
which would piss him off to no end, I think.
Yeah,
but it's his fault.
Yeah. It's quite interesting. I mean, it's interesting. I think now it's maybe less of a mystery than it was, although it's still not a slam dunk who he is. But if you do watch the BBC documentary, it's kind of fascinating to see them follow the trail, and there's lots of different things. It's quite interesting to me that at the beginning there are all these theories, like
some of those are great.
Yeah, I love the fact that he might actually be Jack London.
That's a great one.
Or my favorite one is and the other one I like is the fact, because Ambrose Bierce, of course, famously when
that's right, that's who it is. That's Bierce,
but the thing is, Jack London, I can see
that's not as big a stretch.
But Ambrose Bierce didn't write anything like this, right? Very, very different writings. Someone else we should actually probably do on the show.
Agreed.
Soon as well.
Or the president of Mexico. That was okay.
Yeah, writing books critical of his own
government. Yes.
Yeah.
And explaining the exploited conditions of the indigenous peoples in Chiapas. Yeah, that one makes no sense.
But anyway, across the document, we don't want to spoil all because even now it's still, like we said, it's still kind of fun to watch the process. But basically, it's probably this guy called Rhett Marut, right, who was born in Chicago or something, but raised in Germany, and had
was an anarchist. An anarchist actor. He was a stage actor and pamphleteer, and then got in trouble, and he was in England for a while.
My favorite part about that is his pamphlet is Der Ziegelbrenner, or the Brick Burner, which is just such a great
agreed
title.
Yes. And the photographs of him, like his mugshots, are great too, because he's clearly and I think this is the smart thing. Like he's very. They show this actually as the documentary goes on, because they have all these different photographs of people who are supposedly him, right? And he does manage to do things like pull his chin in, or do things, or like hide his. Like he's always in some way making himself so that you could be. Is that really the guy from that photograph?
If there's one problem I have with the documentaries, actually, there's a few moments where they show a couple of side-by-side photo comparisons, and they say, the narration goes, clearly this is the same man, and I'm like,
you're like, nah,
not
exactly.
So clearly to me, to be honest.
And his wife is great too. I enjoyed anything with her,
she seems to contradict herself all the time, like that. Actually, now you mention it. She's not quite sure. She seems she's not quite sure how much she's allowed to disclose.
Even now, after he's clearly dead. But yes, and then there's moments where she'll talk about, oh well, of course I was lying then, because he wouldn't let me not, But she's still kind of she's a bit hazy on some of the details.
And John Huston's fun as well, right? And he talked to it all about like how it was probably B. Traven who turned up on the set of
Treasure
as Hal Close. So no, it's interesting. Are those books, incidentally, because obviously this is the condensed Cliff Notes version, other books, do you remember other books kind of fun to read in and of themselves? Is there a bit more to the story?
Yes, I think so, but it's been we're talking 25 years something, so it's been a long time since I read them, but I enjoyed them at the time. But I was a bit of a Traven fanatic at the time, because of Rebellion of the Hanged. And I think that I found Rebellion of the Hanged in a really strange way. I think I was sent a list by somebody in Switzerland, like a Swiss anarchist, sent me this incredible list of like all the films made up until that point that had in any way connected to anarchism. So right back to these like early D.W. Griffith silent shorts with bomb throwing bearded lunatics right through, and Rebellion of the Hanged showed up in there with Treasure of the Sierra Madre and a few others with this thing next to them saying these are by B. Traven, German anarchist. And so couldn't find the movie at all, but I went to our university library and found like an original, like first English translation, hardback, like beautiful old, you know,
right. That was from the 50s. It took a little while for it to be translated.
Yeah. And took that home and read it and was just totally swept up. It's funny coming back to it now, maybe a little bit less the second time I read it.
Right.
And we'll get to that because I'm not quite in the same headspace I was then. But I would say that then I can't remember when I first read Death Ship. Might have even been in Japan. I might have found it secondhand in a secondhand bookshop in Japan. That great copy with the cover of the sketchy drawing of the ship on the front.
Which always reminded me of that that Canadian horror film.
Yes. Yes.
With a skull on the front of the. Yeah.
Totally. And then, so I read that, and you know that to me is the best. Not well. I mean, okay. Well, I guess we'll get to Treasure a little bit, but like that to me is still the most intense, just pure like holy shit. And you know, there's very few people who can do what Traven does when he's at his best, which is to take something that really is a political screed, you know, and make it like a barnstorming, page-turning, like holy shit, what's gonna happen next? Oh my god, they got the machetes out now. Like it's action. The only thing I've ever seen like it, ridiculously, is that movie with The Rock and that dude from American Pie and Christopher Walken.
Oh, is it called?
I think in England it was called Welcome to the Jungle, and I think it's called The Runaway.
The Runaway,
in America.
Oh, really? I watched that, but I don't remember thinking, yes, this is an anarchist film for the ages.
The last half of that thing, like, is Rebellion of the Hanged, the action film.
I trepidatiously may take a second look at that.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was not expecting to at all, partly because that guy annoys the hell out of me, the guy who's not The Rock. But I was really taken aback by the whole back half of the film when it's all the indigenous people's plight in this horrible mine and Christopher Walken being a complete piece of shit.
Was it the guy who played Stifler in American Pie?
Yes. But yeah, anyway, but there's not, I still think there's not much like that, and like Death Ship is just it's the perfect. It and The Sea Wolf are the two perfect action stories. Jack London's Sea Wolf. I've never read anything else set on the high seas that excited me as much as those two books.
Unfortunately the film version of The Death Ship is not that.
Yeah, and it's got Mario Adorf in it, who I love.
And it's also got, who is it? Is it Elke Summer who's in that? The very young Elke Summer.
I think so. Yeah.
Jesus. She was quite attractive, eh?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and we'll get to that because that's so when we talk about well, Death Ship is in fact the middle of a trilogy featuring the same lead character, although in a way you wouldn't really.
Is that right? A trilogy of books.
Yes, the first one was The Cotton Pickers, also known as Der Wobbly.
Right, that one I've not read. It's a great, it's a great title in
German.
Please, yeah, great. I like that.
And then the middle one is Death Ship, and the last one is A Bridge in the Jungle, which
is that same
just read? That's Gerard Gales, the same same dude.
That I didn't realize. Yeah, so we should mention that we're going to split our birthday celebrations between Literary as Feck and the two books that we read. We also did the two film adaptations, but there's going to be a separate film crack even episode dropping, as I believe the kids say, soon. So take a look out if you haven't had enough of us after this fantastic chat.
More B Traven.
Yes, yeah.
So shall we jump into the books we actually read then?
Yeah, so there's two of them. Rebellion of the Hanged, which, as we'll mention, is also part of the series, and later on we'll be getting to the bridge in the jungle.
Now, is the bridge? Although, which one is written when? Like, is the bridge in the jungle?
Is first. Bridge in the Jungle is from like 1920.
Right, because that's his first book about Chiapas and the indigenous people down there, I think. Right, and then he comes back and then does this.
Yeah, so sometimes it's mistakenly thought of as part of the jungle.
Right.
So there's actually 6 books in the jungle series, right? The Rebellion of the Hanged being the fifth.
Yeah.
So the one I haven't read yet is the last one.
That's what the General in the Jungle.
I was hoping to read it in time for this, but I couldn't.
I have to say, embarrassingly, I have not read any of the other ones, but you recommended Truzus. Yes, as being particularly good. And so you'll also know more than I will, although I've read a little bit around this, but like that some of these characters that are in the Rebellion of the Hanged do appear in some of the earlier books.
That I can't remember, although I can imagine that is the case. I mean, I don't know. I wasn't taking notes of names as
right,
but certainly they're interesting. I mean, they're all. I think it's apart from General in Jungle, I've read Government, the Correcta, March to the Monteras, Trozes, and this one. And I think Government and especially Trozes are the best ones. Trozes is really good. The one before this is also set in a mangrove plantation, but it's interesting how they kind of there's some overlap, but if you read all of them, they kind of give you this big kind of
right. It's like The Wire for like Chiapas.
Yes, actually, yes, right? Exactly. With each one book focusing on a slightly different element, and there's a lot of overlap between Trozes and Rebellion, which I think why reading it after Trozes I didn't like Rebellion as much, but I think Trozes is
for me it was brand new information, like with no this was not my first book to ever read about probably Chiapas and the brutality that would have been going on there at the time.
Yeah, so we're talking about a bunch of I think it's set in New York in the early 80s. There's a bunch of gay porn actors who decide to fight back against the oppression of the mine shaft. It's the Rebellion of the Well Hung, right? That's the
No, I think this is the one about Chiapas, Mexico.
Sorry.
Treatment of mahogany. I can see that there is the mahogany wood. That could be confusing for sure.
Sorry, I was discussing. I got confused because I was down the mine shaft last night with some pals, and we were talking about. That Joe Gage classic, and I got confused between that and B Traven. Anyway.
So this one. I guess we will. Although it comes later in his writing career, we'll deal with it first. You have a better sense of the books that lead into this. I just see. I still only have this sense of this as a a story with its own beginning, middle, and end. But basically, it's. I mean, one thing that doesn't make sense upon rereading it, and I'm at the time I must have just been at that place in my life where I was just like so like enthused about the up with Rebellion that I didn't even notice that our lead character just disappears, more or less, at least to my mind, unless I'm missing something, appears to just kind of vanish about 4/5 of the way into the book, and the whole last section is like he's not in there, and I'm like, where did he go? Did he die? Did he just did he run away, or did he change his name to a different name? Is he one of these guys?
Right. It's one of the reasons I think I preferred Trozes. I don't know how you pronounce it. I just prefer the Scottish translation. Yes. I'm gonna put on my Trozes. One of the reasons I preferred it over obviously there's a certain amount of mahogany fatigue by the time if you've read both of them, and
right.
But also I think it is a better book because it doesn't get swallowed by its own polemic halfway through. Which Rebellion of the Hanged, I mean, that's varying things with B. Traven, right? Is sometimes he rides it all the way through to the end, and even though it is clearly a polemic, it doesn't necessarily
like with Death Ship.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said,
it completely works as an adventure story.
Yeah, and
with this
process is a bit more. I really enjoyed. I would urge, if there's anyone out there, again, for some reason limited in time and they only want to read one of these, Process would be the one I would recommend. But it's obviously Rebellion of the Hanged seems to, for whatever reason, does seem to be the one that stood out because it's been adapted for screen, which we'll get to in our other show, a couple of times. And and certainly seems to be the more, like, I'd heard of Rebellion of the Hanged totally divorced from the larger series.
Right.
And I'm not quite sure why this is the one. It might be the icon, because the hanging thing is very, it's a very strong image, right?
Yeah, totally. And I think too, I don't know, like, to me, it marries these two things of this story of, like, brutal capitalist exploitation of these indigenous people, and it sort of weds it to like, this would have made a fantastic political spaghetti western. Like, I think that
here we go.
I could totally see like a Damiano Damiani or a Sergio Solima.
I wonder who might you cast in that. I wonder.
That's a great question. Yes, I can't imagine who. But anyway, I really do think that it would have been.
This is amazing to me. I mean,
perfect for that.
You're allowed to get away with it on the birthday show, but it is genuinely of great wonder to me that you are physically.
You can always find a way
to discuss anything without bringing Thomas in.
Nope. No, it's not. It's just not going to happen.
I wonder how Low Wolf and Cub is going to wriggle its way in.
I don't know. Probably not. Well, okay, only in terms of this, I guess, right? Because the other thing that Spaghetti Western did really well was the revenge story, right? Like something terrible happens and there's a build up, and then there's like revenge. And revenge is there's a reason why it's like it's an anchor to so many stories, because it's a great
dramatic device, right? And it's very satisfying, yeah.
And this book has it, right? Because the lead up is like, there's parts where I'd forgotten just how, like, whoa, like, if this is even partly true, and I'm sure probably a lot of it is, wow, it's brutal. And the other thing is, there's a great ear cutting off scene that you would expect, somebody like Sergio Corbucci could have done really well. And I wonder, to some degree, were Traven's books more in the culture at the time? Were more people aware of them back then in the 60s? Because they're only really, like, if they're being published in the 50s in like languages like English and stuff like that, then maybe those writers of those spaghetti westerns would have been avidly reading.
I think so. Yeah, I think they're definitely part of the Zapata Western DNA, right? I think that's it's interesting as well, because we're talking about Traven. So obviously a very dexterous fellow. So I'm assuming these were written in Spanish language, right? Originally, before they were translated. But if he was obviously he wrote in German at a certain point.
Yes.
And then he switched to write. It's one of those things that boggles my mind. The other good example, of course, is we'll talk about him soon. Actually, Joseph Conrad, right? Who English was a second or third language for him. Nabokov as well, right? And
write
passably well in a second or third language. They write phenomenally well.
It is terrifying.
In someone's second or third language is just that's amazing to me, for a man who's struggled with a well, actually a first and a third language for years and years and years.
Is Remains of the Day not originally written in English, or is it written in Japanese and then just translated? But I thought
Remains of the Day is written in English, isn't it?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, which is
but
also
that's not surprising. I mean, because Ishiguro moved to the UK like when he was really young, I think.
Okay, so it wouldn't be as much of a
no, he's as British as he is. I don't even know if he, because I don't think he translates his own books into Japanese. I don't think, because that's someone else. Because I think that's for some of them that might be Murakami actually was.
Okay.
I think for one or two I can't remember. Anyway,
we're straying away from from Traven here. So I mean, I guess
we were allowed to be somewhat self-indulgent, even though we always are.
For our
birthday, so have some cake, Ron.
Ron, Nick, thank you.
As a Freudian tip.
Yes. Don't make me wear the mask again. It's very
a Freudian tip when you say one thing when you mean mother.
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, basically the story is this poor guy, Candido, is more that. I mean, that whole opening section where his wife is dying of appendicitis, he goes to town to try to get her help from the doctor, and the doctor's like, "Get out of here! You don't have the money to pay for the surgery." So he goes around, tries to scrape up the money. Finally, basically makes a deal with these mahogany, these companies that sell basically.
Basically, right? He's
they sell you into slavery, pretty much.
Yeah.
So you become an indentured servant to the mahogany company. He takes the money, goes back, and his wife is already dead. He attempts to get out of the contract and is told no, and forced to take his two kind of infant children with him into
his bag of piglets.
And this is his two little piggies, yes. And they go to this camp, and his sister shows up as well, who's quite a bit younger than he is, and wants to help them out and be an auntie to her nephews. And they go and they have a really bad time. Basically.
Yeah.
The camp
until the worm.
I mean, they're almost one-dimensional. But I'll say one thing, and actually that one thing that the book has over the movie. Was that it gives more context to, I would say the story is about ruthless exploitation, but it's also about loss aversion. It's about these dudes who also are in debt. They're wealthier guys, but that all of their money is tied up in this mahogany business, and stuff's going on around in the surrounding countryside. The stirrings of the Mexican Revolution are starting to happen.
Yes.
And there's also been a big problem with rain, and so they're not getting the wood out fast enough. And they're worried they're going to lose their money. And so they start making these decisions based on, like, we need to get our money, and we need to, but not looking around them carefully enough at, oh shit, things are very close to the tipping point, but they're still there doing exactly the same awful stuff, and just kind of out of this sense of we can't lose our money.
Yeah, I suppose it's not, you never feel even in the least bit sorry for them at all. But I suppose what Traven's trying to do here is he's not to absolve them of blame, but I suppose he's trying to.
They have a motivation.
Well, the villain of the piece, more than them, the greater villain, is just the capitalist system.
Yes, right? Which is consistent with all of his other writing.
Yeah.
But I would say the problem with the film adaptation, which I do like in many ways, but they're just mustache twirling,
absolutely
villains.
Yeah.
We don't get any sense of why the fuck they're sticking around. It's just they're just assholes who will not stop hurting people for their own pleasure.
We'll get to that over there. But but sticking to the book, I mean, so we should mention as well, so the title does come from this horrendous practice that they have of disciplining people they haven't chopped
productive enough.
Yeah, they haven't
the quota.
Enough. Yeah, their quota of mahogany is they basically get kind of hung by the neck.
Strung up in the jungle at night. The descriptions of the insects.
Yeah.
The descriptions of the insects, they're just nostrils caked in ants, and that stuff was just, I was I'd forgotten that. And then that there's jaguars stalking around, and people are just getting you're hung up, and you might just get mauled.
The way they explain it is well, you can beat a man like to a certain extent, but he's just gonna get inured to it and just ignore you after a while. But he can't ignore a good hanging, like to take you to the brink of death. And they mentioned some other things as well, like before the hanging, that a few people are buried up to their neck, like in the sun. And yeah, just ants and shit release and crawl all over their head. And so they're like they're these tortures kind of devised to truly
put the fear of God.
Yeah.
Right. The true, like to absolutely make you terrified. So the idea being that, yeah, you won't ever want to get hung again. So
so you will cut 5 tons of mahogany every day, regardless of the weather or
and you know, for those of you who, like me, didn't know much about mahogany trees before reading the book, I knew nothing. I knew that
we
it was
may
very
be a bit
expensive.
late on this, but boycott mahogany, hashtag boycott mahogany. Here we go.
No, I just didn't know about
Wall Street.
I just didn't know. I mean, as growing up as a kid, I had always been told mahogany was really, really expensive. And
see,
really
I wasn't even that. I never really thought. For me, it was just another type of wood. I don't ever remember growing up thinking like,
oh, I thought it was high end, like a mahogany table or something that.
But wood, of course, being one of Nick's nicknames.
Yes, indeed.
In his other line of work.
But because they grow in swamps, right? Yeah, Clive, you've been into swamps. I know you have. I know you've been into proper, like, dense jungle vegetation, right? Like mangrove.
I've been into mangrove.
And as I have in Okinawa. And so, but I didn't realize mahogany trees were basically the same thing. That they got these massive root systems that go up, you know, like a good third of the tree before you even get to the trunk.
Yes.
And so part of the story is, you know, Candido learns pretty quickly you can't actually cut down a mahogany tree before building a whole scaffold in order to get up into the tree to take it down. So yeah, you get to learn a few things about you know, mahogany farming.
In which case, I highly recommend you read Trozes, because
it's got more of the same
stuff in that about more stuff about like what motherfuckers the roots are to basically pull like stumps out of the ground using pulleys and chains and
But this is another thing that I want to bring up now, and we might have talked about this before. I don't know, but I read a book some years back written by. We probably have. I read a book some years back written by a fellow called Tom Wayman, who's a Canadian poet, and he was also a professor at the university I went to for a while, and good friends with John Lent, who was my writing teacher back when I was a university student.
John Lennon, did you?
John Lent, L-E-N-T. So John Lent was also Shane Koizan's writing teacher, Shane Koizan, who made much more success out of the written word than I ever managed to. But anyhow, so he wrote this book about
The night is young.
He wrote this book about work writing, and I remember reading it and being fascinated by it, because at the time that was when I was first beginning to write the short stories that I would try to turn into the Grease Trap book, right, about my experiences working in fast food restaurants. And he said that like that
is a good read, by the way, viewers.
Oh, thank you.
You know where you can find it now? Is the
someday
website still up?
I'll figure out a way of sharing it with the world in a version I'm happy with. But yeah, so the idea being that basically work takes up a disproportionate amount of most of our lives, right? A lot of people work some sort of 9 to 5 or whatever, and yet it's really not in literature that much. It's not in our entertainment, like, and there's very few jobs that we ever see in TV, other than he basically was like lawyers, police officers,
journalists,
maybe. Yeah, there's like 3 or 4.
But as I've heard from many journalists over the years, it's the rarest thing in the world to see a journalist on screen whose life is anything like a real journalist.
And I imagine for doctors as well, and probably for lawyers, right? Like, so yeah, not only and then he's like no other jobs seem to exist in Hollywood, and to some degree in books. And so I've always really enjoyed books that talk about work and the grind of work, and get into the nitty gritty, the granular shit about some job I've never done, but I'm like, I do want to know more about how that machine works. Puts the corks in the top of wine bottles.
endlessly fascinating. It would be if you could do it. It would be nice to like make a living just starting a new job every month.
Yes, yes,
Before you
and
get
learning the
bored of it.
basics, the
Yeah,
ropes.
yeah.
Yeah, totally.
One of the benefits that happens sometimes, what I quite like about when we're shooting dramas and reconstructing dramas on location,
Right.
sometimes, yeah, you get to go into places like
The fish factory that you
after
described.
hours fish factories or just bars,
Yes.
restaurants, various factories, and you're like, oh, you know, and you get to go behind the scenes and kind of see.
You once go to like what you thought was like a chop shop where they were like,
Yes, yeah, where they were like, yeah, stolen bicycles were basically being put together in
right.
but yeah, that was strange.
Um,
For a Gact music video of all things.
that's awesome. But yeah, so and then my limited experience with farm work as well in the Okanagan Valley on the wineries and stuff, and factory work. That was my only experience of being on a factory. Was also in the winery on the whatever, the conveyor belts where the wine was shot into the bottles and they were corked and stuff. I told you that story, right? About
Yes,
how
yeah. Speaking of
the
wine,
bloody fingers. Go
oddly
on.
enough, slight aside, my local supermarket has like a remainder table, like things
Okay, yeah.
going out of
Date,
get past
right?
the sell by date or whatever, and you always have a look over there because you find some bargains. And the other day there was a whole bunch of Francis Ford Coppola's wines.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, so it's the first time I'd had any of the Coppola
Family
wine.
vineyard. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, was it any good?
It was all right. Yeah, I can't say I was blown away by it, but it was yeah, it's okay, passable.
They've had some nice Sartori, like Italian red, on sale here at the liquor shop lately that I've been picking up, and it's very smooth, very drinkable.
Isn't Sartori as well? Isn't that's another book that I keep meaning to but is that Sartori, or is that there's a book by what's his name? Who's the guy, one name author who wrote the Eiger Sanction?
What do I think it's for some reason I'm thinking Len Dake, but oh no, yeah, okay. Oh damn it. Yes. Trevelyan? No.
Something like that, yeah. Oh, that's
okay.
Used to be the BBFC. But anyway,
whatever. Yeah.
We need to get to him to some point as well, because didn't he write some book called Sartori, or someone else wrote it, which is based on one of his books, which is supposed to be like some sort of weird Japanese ninja espionage classic.
Okay.
It sounds like something we should read.
Yeah, I agreed.
I derailed us there again.
Yes. So, but anyway, back to basically it all goes to shit for this family, and one of the kids drowns in a particularly harrowing scene, falling out of a boat because their drunken boat guy is drunk, and they're being forced to do this, and then in punishment, because they were attempting to run away at this point, they then lop off the ear of the other child, in as I said, a scene that is pretty harsh, to say the least, right? And then this is kind of this becomes the tipping point, and then there is one of the three brothers who runs this place does get murdered in it, particularly. Well, he doesn't actually, right? He doesn't get murdered. He gets tied to a tree. His eyes are gouged out with thorns, and then he goes back to his cabin or whatever, and beats up his girlfriend, and then shoots himself. Because he can't believe he's been emasculated by an Indian.
But yeah, basically. This is kind of This is the thing. Maybe we probably should have stressed from the beginning this is specifically the whole series is specifically Indians, right? Mexican Indians.
Yeah. It's Chiapas, Mexico, which is largely indigenous, and the exploiters are largely Spanish.
Yes.
There's also mention of there's a racial component for sure.
There's a bit at the beginning of the book, like before he ends up with the mahogany, where he's like, "Oh no, you're not from the German tobacco people.
Yes, yeah.
So that sounds like
somehow they're even worse
apparently than the mahogany farms. Is you don't want to be working for the German tobacco industry, but I don't think Traven ever did write his
book about that.
No, of the German tobacco farm.
But yes, yeah. And basically, and then as you said, it becomes very polemic and very much a revolution sort of a book in that last section. Which, yeah, when as a younger reader and when I was more gung ho,
like,
that was really exciting to me. But at this point, I was like, oh, we're kind of losing sight of some of the characters that I was interested in, and it gets a little broad.
Well, there is literally a character that's brought in as well, who's like a professor or something, who is just a mouthpiece. And, and the story stops every now and again, and he explains. You see what happens if you do not fight for the right reason, then and then it's.
But you know what's great about that is that like this is where life imitates art, because you know Subcommandant Marcos is.
I do not.
Okay, all right. Okay, so in the 1980s, there was still an enormous amount of exploitation going on in Chiapas of the indigenous people down there, and this group called the EZLN, which basically were just known as the Zapatistas, sort of formed in those communities to defend themselves from their treatment, and a lot of this was the PRI. We've talked about the PRI before, the Party of Institutionalized Revolution, that comes up after the Mexican Revolution and then becomes basically a ruling dictatorial party. And they're the ones who did that massacre we watched the film about around the Olympic.
Right.
So anyway, in the 80s, this young-ish professor from not from Chiapas, not like an indigenous guy, moves down there and starts leading the people in this revolutionary movement against, and they got worldwide fame. Marcos was a really great speaker. He always wore a balaclava, so you just kind of get his beautiful glowing eyes and the cap, and he was very much a kind of in some ways like a Che Guevara for the 90s, except that they came at it where they took these councils of tribal elders and they put them in charge, and he basically put himself at their beck and call. So but he was really telegenic. He was a really great speaker. And so at that time, by the 90s, as I said, it was when it was in full swing, the government had to back off and basically be like, all right, we'll stop some of what we're doing and we'll let you kind of have your jungle. And they were actually in these communities, making these little Zapatista dolls. So these are from Chiapas, Mexico, from that time. That's wood, hopefully not mahogany. I don't think so. These are woven by the ladies. They've got little
quite cute.
Someone had babies on them and stuff like that. Yeah. So I bought these from a
to ease your conscience.
Yes. No, I bought these in Mexico, in the Baja when I was visiting.
Oh, that's good. You didn't buy them in Harrods.
Marks and Spencers. But yeah, so I got those from a lady who had been down there, and she herself was she was a university professor, and her daughter was one of the most beautiful women I have ever seen. I was probably 22, she was maybe 18, and I was thunderstruck the way that Al Pacino was thunderstruck in the first Godfather film when he goes to Sicily, and I was just like, okay, I can't do anything about this. Jennifer and I were already together, and I have no idea if she would have been reciprocal anyway, but wow, holy crap.
Obviously
she was
engraved,
absolutely beautiful. So yeah, there we go.
That was a good mixture of the little head and the big head. You've got to have that. See, that's the thing, for things to really embed on your
right.
Yeah, you got to have the mixture. You can't be too highfalutin,
can't be too cerebral.
No. Is that a movement? Is that a movement that survived, or did it?
I believe so. Yes, because actually, what's his face? Diego Luna, the Mexican actor, just I think last year was photographed with Subcommandant, chatting with him about something. So yeah, I think they are still a going concern down there, but they're less in the news because
sniffing around after his daughter.
Maybe. But anyway,
that's my Diego Luna. It's good, isn't it? It's not racist at all.
No. So yeah, I just said
that your daughter is very good looking. Oh no, it wasn't his daughter. I just made that bit up. It was
no. Yeah, there was no connection to the subcommandant.
But still, I got my highly accurate Diego Luna impression in there, so yeah, fine.
But if you're interested, I would Google that. There were some great documentaries made back in the 90s about that whole what was going on.
I wrote it down.
It's worth checking out.
Don't worry, I've written it down, and I'm going to put it on my list, my big pile of paper. So I'll get to it in about 25 years, and then
for sure.
Then.
So basically, Chiapas continues to be a very impoverished place, and so it's just weird that part of the book was going on at the time. And I remember thinking when I was reading the book, holy crap! Like there is like that character who do seem ridiculously like, as you said, like stock, flat cardboard. Like I am a well-meaning, teacher who has come down here to teach people how to fight back, did actually exist at the time in Mexico when I was reading the book.
And also worth mentioning, even though it does stray into that, it almost redeems itself, because the very, very, very end of the book is basically someone falling flat on their face, which is kind of quite an interesting way. I feel as if a lot of B. Traven books kind of end quite abruptly.
Right.
Almost as if he's, well, that's all I've got to say. So
he just drives into a tree and then walks away from the wreck.
But I quite like that. I quite like the idea of someone taking a pratfall, because it does kind of hint towards how even the most well-meaning of these movements sometimes, because the reason I asked about the whether that, because I'm always happy to hear about these movements that don't end up eating themselves, like like what happened in like Nicaragua or somewhere like that.
Exactly. Where no, I think it was more genuinely democratic and more based in indigenous ways of thinking and knowing and that stuff. But yeah, anyway, I mean, I think we should probably just jump on to the other book, which is, I think, for me, more interesting, actually. Reading the other book, because it's almost like a National Geographic. Like, this one feels lived. This one feels like the Gerard Gales character, who does seem to maybe be more of like just another name for B. Traven, because apparently he did spend some time on a death ship, supposedly.
This definitely does feel like this. Yeah, you could, because it's the kind of, it feels as if it's based on an incident, because if it's not based on an incident, I can't imagine. I mean, you should never underestimate the power of the human imagination. But it doesn't feel like the kind of story that someone would
invent. Yes, I agree. And it seems so well observed. Like, it really feels like the minutia, again, the granular, getting into the specifics of maybe we should just very briefly, because it's also amazing that unlike the film adaptation, which makes some questionable decisions with the beginning, I think this is really just one night, like basically like one night and one morning. Like, the whole book takes place in like 36 hours or something, right? Basically, white guy who is the same guy from Death Ship. In which case, anyway, we'll talk about it when we talk about the movie. So he shows up.
Alligator hunter, right? Who
is he in the book? I didn't even. In the movie, it definitely leans into that part really clearly.
It is, man. He seems to be someone who's just looking around for a way to make money, right? And it seems like, I might go. I've heard there's lots of alligators down in this river, so he ends up in a very small community. There's basically a bunch of huts kind of clustered around this river and a water pump. And this is kind of fascinating as well, the fact that as fucking the devil's asshole of a place to live as this is, it's nowhere near as bad as maybe some of the places that need their water pumped
Yes,
several kilometers away from
exactly.
this station, right? This is
Yeah.
almost like an oasis.
Yes, yes.
It kind of reminds me of, oddly enough, like because I grew up in a really, really small village in Wales, which I think most city slickers would think would be the back of beyond. But believe it or not, our little village was actually a beacon for even further flung
Right.
communities of farmers and things. Like coming to our village was coming to the West End for the evening.
The event, yes, of the season.
Honestly, there would be people who would come to our local pub. I mean, yeah.
The Wicklow town we had, was like what 6,000 people, and it had satellite, like Rathnew and places that nearby that were much smaller again. And so yeah, you would, I guess, like our Super Quinn,
a lot of banjo playing
was the place to be. So anyway, so yeah, he shows up at this place. There's another guy there called Slay, EIGH, and he's been living in the community for quite a while. He's also an American, but he's been living there for a long time. And he's basically gone native.
It's funny as well. His character is like, it's either perfect casting when you get to the film, or just because I knew John Huston is in the film, I immediately thought of John Huston while
agreed. But yes, he is ideal in the role. More so, I think, than the guy who plays although he's a bit of a cipher in the book. As I said, I felt like he was more of a character in Death Ship, much more of a character, and this he's almost just there as our stand-in set of eyes to see new things with, right?
Like, yes.
But yeah, basically there's going to be a fiesta in the town, and supposedly there's going to be a band that's going to show up. And this is great because, I mean, having spent time in basically like a tiny fishing village in Mexico, which is weirdly and kind of sadly much bigger now. It's grown up exponentially over the last 25 years. But back then, my first time when I was there, the time when I got these little Zapatistas.
How dare they prosper and
yes, damn them. It's not nearly as quaint as it once was. Exactly. So there are several different beer companies in Mexico, some of which are well known around the world. Corona's obviously the most famous outside of
They had a really good advertising campaign recently.
Oh, I would imagine, yes. Everyone was on the tip of everyone's tongue, and in their nostrils as well. But then there's Tecate, there's Sol. Sol is really nice. But anyway, so what happened was, I'm sure I've told this before. Basically, they had this Tecate came to town to have a fiesta with the locals, and they brought these like 15 and 16-year-old girls in like tiny halter tops and like short shorts to dance on the beach with like the local people, right? And it was wild. And my dad was like, yeah, like Tecate Beer Company is having a party down on the beach, and like everyone in town is invited, so like let's go. And so me and my brother and my dad went, and yeah, it was awesome. And then at the end of the night, that's where I saw people who were so drunk that they couldn't walk being helped back to their cars by the police.
Right.
Put into the driver's seats and patted on the back, and we're like good luck. And then it made sense why on roads that are just straight and going, like you've seen some of those Alex Cox films, right, where just Mexican highways just disappear into like one point perspective, like perfectly, and yet every 500 meters there's a cross or a shrine, and you're like, how are people dying on these roads there? I mean, I know there's a lot of cows wandering on them, but still.
Right.
But then I was like, oh, okay, yes, well, that makes sense. That's very Irish. So anyway, I got all of the stereotypes out in one go there. I think I
think there's
somebody else I can offend, but I'll
I'm trying to imagine the wild Guinness party on the beach variation though.
Yeah, pretty much. There'll still be cows in the street, and there'll still be probably your local police, your local Gardaí walking people back to their cars, and
Pretty good. No, go on.
Good luck there, Paddy.
He doesn't have a car. It's just down the road.
So anyway, so yes, So, you know, I mean, the most wonderfully tragic part of the story, because it's a fucking bummer, to be honest. Once I got into it, it's like, oh my God, this whole book is just about this, pretty much, right?
Well,
So
it's
there's this.
interesting. It is obviously if yeah, we'll get to what the story is actually about. But I suppose inevitably it's supposed to be about embracing it as well, though, right? The fragility of life, and by the time it gets to the end, it does seem to somehow snatch some kind of joie de vivre out of the horrible situation. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And it's interesting too. I think it really shows. Are we about to run out? No, we got a couple of minutes. It also shows the importance of ritual in making something like that copable with. I feel like.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because he does the thing about he runs the gamut, right? So he goes from, look, what the fuck, the kids, like, he's not coming back, blah, blah, but then comes all the way around to like, yeah, but that's not the point. It doesn't matter that it's ultimately pointless, because everything is ultimately pointless. We're all going to be dust one day anyway, right? So yeah, so and there's talk they also bring in some stuff about like superstition, and well, we know it's superstitious. That's not the point. There's more there's more than just saying, well, that's not true. There's like a certain benefit sometimes to putting the blinders on and accepting something that isn't true, or just keeping your trap shut, and not
exactly.
And
I also think that too, like this does a great job of showing that thing that I think is true of many indigenous communities around the world, where Christianity and native like religious traditions kind of just exist side by side.
Yes, they shouldn't.
And they're both kind of like
It's just a convenient way to like, oh, I like the sound of that hymn. Yeah, but that's about it, right? And you cultural appropriation can work both ways.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there's a part where there's like they're looking for a candle, and this one's been blessed by a priest, and everyone's like, "Oh, that's going to be a really good one then."
Right.
Even though what they're actually doing is basically like a medicine man sort of like a thing, Yeah. So yeah, that was cool.
Yeah. So while partying, I do quite like the descriptions of this kind of rather pathetic little gathering.
Yes, yeah. And there isn't nobody's brought in a big sound system, and there are no Takati girls there. It's basically just well, in fact, the band hasn't showed up at all, which is a bit of an issue. They possibly gone off to another party that was closer to where they were, or just didn't show up. So there's just one scraggly guy with his terrible fiddle playing.
Although he's better than anyone else, right? So when anyone else go there, like
tries to chime in, they're like even worse.
Yeah. And then and then a little boy goes missing.
Yep. Who has recently been given brand new shoes from Texas.
Right.
With slippery soles.
Yes, just to push that message just a little bit.
Yep.
Even capitalist footwear will bring you down. Yes, and it turns out, I mean, spoilers, kind of, although it's foreshadowed pretty, it's quite nicely done, actually, the way that.
Yes.
So basically, the kid has kind of clearly fallen in the river, and everyone kind of knows he's fallen in the river, but refuse to admit it for a while.
And keeps giving false hope to the mom, who's basically frantically going from person to person asking if they've seen her son, and everyone keeps hand waving it away and be like, it's all right. And then I did like the part where two different groups of kids, for some whatever reason, go up and make up absolute bullshit stories about how like, oh, he got on a horse with this guy and he went off to this other town, and which is sketchy enough anyway, like not something the mom wants to hear.
Something that kids do, right? I mean,
because it makes them the center of attention in that moment.
And also, who knows? It's almost as if, who knows what their motivation is? It's not necessarily means
maybe they think they're being helpful.
Exactly, like, oh yeah, let's tell her, and then she'll be fine.
Feel better.
Yeah. It's better than having fallen in the river, right?
or they've convinced themselves that they saw this.
Yes, that's another
an
thing.
hour ago.
I convinced myself of shitloads of things when I was a kid that
Yeah.
obviously didn't actually happen, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, please don't make any stunning revelations.
Hopefully didn't.
Huh. So yes, so the kid has gone off the bridge basically, and then
Well, yeah, it's a bridge. It's worth mentioning as well. There's this bridge which is just it's like there's no guardrails, right? They've like built this.
Yeah.
And again, just it was built for some trucks to go to like an oil refinery or something, right? So yeah, once again, it's another horrible symbol of oppression
and capitalist exploitation.
Yeah,
and
but
it's funny.
Yes, it has no guardrails or anything, so it's very easy.
Yes.
It's a very treacherous bridge, especially in the dark, right? Because it's curving one way and it's going the other, and
that's what's really interesting is that, like, when reading the book, for some reason, I didn't fill in the dark properly. Like in that, and then so actually watching the film, I was like, oh yeah, right. You can't see a freaking thing in the jungle, which I remember from having lived in a forested place that had no electric lights. That once the sun goes down, and if it's a cloudy night, you can't see your hand in front of your face.
Even where I grew up, which I didn't realize when I was a kid, but I've gone back after several years living in Tokyo. When the lights go out at night, like, oh yeah, it's proper fucking dark country. Right?
Yeah.
Wow. How the hell did I move about the dark when I was a kid?
Yeah, totally. I wandered into the forest when I lived on the reserve one day, going home from school.
I'm slightly by the way. That is like the third or fourth time now you've now said totally, which you didn't do. Have you been hanging out in the valley? Like,
yes, I used to live in the valley, the Okanagan Valley. Yeah, maybe. Maybe it's just for our 50th anniversary. I thought I'd add a little spice.
Right.
But yeah, anyway, so yes, I had the experience of not being able to see at all in nature, and that is a fairly terrifying thing. But in any case,
yes, kid goes off the bridge. Is especially this nature is horrible and dangerous.
Yes,
and you
we know from the other book. There's jaguars and crocodile. Well, there's crocodiles in this book. So kid goes hopping off the bridge, and then we find out at the end, or later on, has cracked his head, and that's why he wasn't splashing around or anything. That's why nobody heard him drown.
Right.
They heard a thunk as he hits the water.
Yeah.
Or a splash, but that's
And they use this, like you said, they use this weird divining device where like a candle on a board that
they make a little raft and put this magic candle blessed by a priest on it, and it floats around, and it eventually does actually settle in the area. No one quite knows how or why
it works. No, and they find the body, and they take it out, and then so there's a long protracted.
That's the funeral
morning, and then finally we get to the funeral.
Funeral operations,
which is a kind of slightly. That's when I think that's when the film kind of goes into more redemptive territory, right? Because in some ways the funeral procession is quite farcical, but
in the book,
but
I like the competing ladies making different crowns for him part of the book, which is not really they do have him in, but they don't really show or deal or dwell on it.
B. Traven could have so easily, it could have in some way seemed exploitative or distasteful, or just like someone slumming it or something like that. But like you said, he just has this razor sharp focus on just purely kind of observing. And throwing in a few things here and there, but it does seem it's there's nothing offensive about it, even though
it's observing with sympathy, but not a sympathy that's condescending.
It's not condescending, and also it's
it's just a human sympathy.
Yeah, and it's not too. He's not necessarily like he is projecting his own thoughts onto it to a certain extent, but he's also very aware of what he's doing so then kind of pulls it back, or comments on his own projection on it. So it's not about him. And when it does become about him, he realizes that it's becoming about.
Well, there's actually a moment there's certain things that struck me as being really true, like really well observed.
But sorry, before you mention it, just to finish that thought, though, because that sounds very cerebral and wampy, but it arrives there totally naturally. I think, like, I don't. It hasn't necessarily been thought through. It's just been almost written. I get the feel it's kind of like almost like a first draft, like without much tidying up, but it's just, you know, from the brain to the paper kind of thing. It's just, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
There's something else, I don't know how much I want to talk about this, but there's something that's really well observed about being the outsider in a community when you can simultaneously be seen as having like possibly magical powers, but also maybe could just be scapegoated as being like, it's your fault, guy who's not from town. Like, and you know, which is true of any situation, right? Whether there's race involved or not. It's just the inside people and the outside people, right? I mean, it's a long-standing thing. But it did make me think of like being in Japan, even, right? How I got certain privileges that I wasn't entitled to, like, you know, just by the fact that I looked different and I got certain accesses and so on.
You get to be somewhere.
Same time,
pet gaijin for the evening, right? Where they bring the place that normal people wouldn't be allowed to go to. Yeah,
I got backstage at Kabuki and things like that, where I had Japanese students who spent their whole lives desperately hoping someday to be able to go backstage, and I was like, oh yeah, it was whatever, it was cool. And then at the same time, you know, other moments where you're like, oh man, if shit really went sideways, like, am I okay? Like, is everything gonna be all right? Like, if it had gone more of a you know, Violence Jack version of post you know, earthquake in Japan, would I have been, you know, early on the like roasting spit, you know?
That's just you being a paranoid hypochondriac, though.
That could be that could be for sure.
I can't say I ever had those particular thoughts.
But those moments in the book, I seemed really real to me, where he's kind of, because he has that experience of, on the one hand, being kind of like a good luck charm, and then also being like, man, if this turns the other way, if the people do see me as being somehow having been responsible for this, this might be the last anybody ever sees me.
Right. Yeah, and there's a bit. Also the Slay character, the John Huston in the film character, gets to kind of I don't know. There's interesting. There's a section. I suppose the only section of the book that does feel slightly more labored or feels slightly more as if they're trying to get some kind of message across, other than just the observation. Is there's a whole talk about like the
oil. The oil field, the oil field.
No, the Slay character just talking about like, oh, you're overthinking this, and you
right.
You know,
yes, you're bringing your Western mind.
Yes, and there's such a thing as, you know, well, it's not magic necessarily, but this is a real thing, and the main character kind of seems almost torn between, on the one hand, it's quite interesting. He's like, no, I appreciate what you're telling me, but also he's very conscious of going down the too far the other way, the magical Negro route, where they can do no wrong, right? The indigenous people are perfect in every way.
And it's, you know, I mean, it's also funny, like he doesn't shy away, and as Traven never does, from the base reality of like, so again, we're in a jungle, it's hot, the kid starts to go off really fast, you know, and that stuff that the book doesn't shy away from dealing with, right? Even the mom eventually is like repulsed by
her own child. But again, it's done. But you don't judge her for it, obviously, because no, I don't want to kiss that ripe little rotting boy either. Even if he did come from my womb, you know. Because that's not my kid anymore. That's just flesh, you know. So the Bridge in the Jungle was a fascinating little read, I think.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the stronger of the two as a novel, I guess. Right. But I still got off on the sort of misery porn revenge of Rebellion of the Hanged again. Well, not quite as intensely as the first time, but there was still a part of me that was like, yeah, give it to those capitalist exploiting scum,
Right.
you know. So yeah, it's still a fun read, and just the grisliness of it actually. I don't know if I even noticed as much the first time, but I was surprised by actually how grim some of the stuff is in that kind of that first 2/3 of the book.
So yeah, happy birthday to us.
Yes.
And for more talk of the film adaptations of these two books, why don't you come and join us over at Film Crack? And here's to 50 more episodes.